So welcome to part one of the Neurodiversity Week webinar, part of a two-part series looking at neurodiversity in the workplace. My name is Simon and I'm the host for today. We have an amazing panel of people joining us today to talk about neurodiversity in the workplace. Today's discussion is focused very much on businesses and how you can create a neurodiverse, inclusive environment. So who have we got on our panel today? Today, I have the pleasure of introducing Dr. Emma Philpott MBE, IASME CEO, a company that works very much in the cyber domain, but also is a massive advocate for diversity, not just for neurodiversity, but disability as well. We've got Chris Dunning-Walton, serial entrepreneur and neurodiversity champion. And last but not least, we've got occupational therapist, owner of Arms Rehab and Positive Talks podcast co-host, Mike Cowan-Jones. Welcome to you all. So let's start with an introduction. If you don't mind, Emma, I'm going to start with you. Could you introduce yourself and IASME and a brief overview of the importance of neurodiversity to your business?
Yes, of course. So we are best known as the delivery partner for Cyber Essentials for the government. And that's how we get most of our income. We do assessments, well, we manage the delivery of assessments to Cyber Essentials, and we do various other certification schemes as well. But actually our heart is in trying to make things more fair and accessible. So that includes things like trying to make certification more achievable for all organizations, trying to make the cybersecurity business accessible for all sizes of organizations in all parts of the country. So not just massive companies in London, but also very much trying to make sure that all people that want to can join the cybersecurity sector. And it's really been driven by the experience that I've had of my daughter having autism and finding various things like school and some workplace aspects very difficult while still being very, very talented at cybersecurity. So that's us.
Fantastic. Thank you, Emma. Can I go to you next, Chris, please?
Yes, good morning. Thank you, Simon. Thank you so much for having us today. So Chris Dunning-Walton, I am an exited founder of a company called InfoSec People, leading cybersecurity recruitment and executive search business that I built over 15 years and sold successfully a couple of years ago. My own journey around neurodiversity, I am diagnosed with ADHD. I have two young boys, 10 and 8, who have ADHD as well. My nephews have autism. So I think from a personal journey point of view, neurodiversity has certainly been something that I have both experienced and in reflection, I'm very keen to help be a positive catalyst for change around how we unlock the potential that exists for people who are neurodiverse. Alongside that, a wider piece around inclusion more generally and how we can build really excellent places for people to be their true and authentic selves. My business has always been about connecting people and building communities, and I'm a big believer that together we can build some incredible businesses and achieve some really incredible things, but we can only do that together. So inclusion and business matched together is kind of my passion and what I like to do and what I like to unlock. So thank you so much for having me, Simon. I really appreciate it.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, Chris. And Mike, over to you.
Thank you very much. In common with both Emma and Chris, neurodiversity runs in our family, and it's very interesting. I'm an occupational therapist by background, and I thought I knew what autism and ADHD was about until I had my own children. And then I realised I knew diddly squat. Jeremy Clarkson, forgive me for borrowing your farm's name. But it's through that we have developed a range of training related to both health, education and other sectors as well, in trying to increase the lived experiences, the awareness of lived experiences of being neurodiverse people, and how that can influence the day-to-day things that we do, such as employment. Just to round off, I will just say that we suspect I might be neurodivergent as well. I haven't formally been diagnosed, but one of the things you learn through your children is, oh my goodness, that's me. So I sort of might have a bit of lived experience in that perspective as well. But good to see you, everybody, and thank you to viewers at home for watching and joining in.
Fantastic. And finally, I'll introduce myself. My name's Simon O'Gorman. I'm the owner or co-owner with my wife of Adapt IT, and we provide technological solutions for people with disabilities. We have a tie also into neurodivergency. My daughter is ADHD. Very similar to Mike, this opened up a lot of question marks with regards to, where it came from within the family, and that has led to quite a large exploration actually throughout my entire family, including my parents. Like Mike, I'm not diagnosed, lived with this for 50 years, so not quite sure what an actual diagnosis would achieve. But we have quite a lot of experiences which kind of link back into neurodiversity, and I'm sure we'll get to discuss that over the next couple of webinars. Fantastic. Thanks very much for those introductions. So now I'm going to go on to the main discussion point, and one of the things that I would like to discuss with you in some depth. So the government released a press release on the 30th of January 2025 aimed at looking at getting more neurodiverse people into the workplace. So instead of saying this in my own words, I'm just going to read what it is they said in their press release. People who are neurodiverse will benefit from better employment prospects and more inclusive workplaces, thanks to the work and advice of a new expert panel launched today, Wednesday, the 29th of January. The latest employment figures demonstrate the stark reality for many, with the employment rate for disabled people with autism at 31% compared to 54.7% for all disabled people, highlighting a significant gap for some neurodiverse people. The work of the panel will focus on what actions employers can take to foster a more inclusive workplace, but also what actions the government can introduce to break down barriers to opportunity for people with a neurodiverse condition such as autism. And when I was reading this, I found this quite interesting because we all know what the agenda is. It's about getting more people into work. It's about raising more tax revenue and things like that. One thing that didn't seem to be in this press release was the benefits to business with regards to that diversity and what neurodiverse people bring, but also the right for neurodiverse people to be given the opportunity in the first place. So this really leads me on to a discussion I know we've all had in the past, and without throwing you directly into it, Emma, I apologise for this. Seem you've worked in this environment and your businesses are already championing neurodiversity and disability in the workplace. How have you looked at this and how has it benefited your business? Emma.
Well, so I first came across this when my daughter started going to like a sort of a help group that was full of people with Asperger's, which, one term for autism. And all the people that were there'd be about 60 people hanging out, all adults, and a lot of them had depression and anxiety. And after I'd been for a few times, I realized the depression and anxiety was not because of their autism. It was because they weren't in work. They didn't, they really wanted a job and they couldn't get a job. They were very clever people. And I didn't understand why they weren't in work. So IASME started offering free training, cybersecurity training for unemployed neurodivergent adults. And we recruited the whole first cohort of 14 people. It was only then, really, that I started understanding some of the issues. It is very, very hard to be a truly inclusive company. It really is. And we have been on this long journey. That was 2018. We are still learning. You know, we've moved away from having blanket policies for, oh, if you're autistic, we offer you this. If you're ADHD, we offer you this, to just seeing everybody as an individual, trying to help them know what will help them overcome barriers. Because somebody is autistic doesn't mean to say they know what the solution is. It's not a case of tell me what reasonable adjustments you need. Most people don't know. In fact, often they don't know they're autistic. They just know that they can't do this thing, which is part of work. So it's all about working with individuals to help them overcome barriers. And sometimes it is really hard. So, for example, there are subtle aspects like not always understanding a relationship between an employee and an employer. That is very fundamental. If you say to someone, I'm paying your wage, so I need you to do this, and they don't really understand the relationship, they might say, no, I'm not doing that, or I'm going to do it a completely different way because I think I know better. Those kind of very intrinsic barriers are very, very hard to get around. I think we've done well. So half of IASME is autistic, and about a third of IASME team is disabled, either physically or in some other way. And we manage, not just manage, we are excelling, we're blooming, we are forging ahead as one of, I think, of course I would think, one of the most innovative companies. That is because of the diversity. So on one hand, it is really hard. It's hard for the employer to do it right. On the other hand, if you can do it, it makes your company amazing. It makes you fly. It makes you different to all your other competitors. And at the end of the day, it makes you more money. That's the crux of it. We are owned by a bigger company now. And that company doesn't really, I'm sure it wants to be good and inclusive, but it actually wants me to meet my targets. And the best way for me to meet my targets and exceed those is to have a very, very diverse company. So I'll let Chris go now.
Thank you, Emma.
Fantastic. So in reflection, and I can't speak highly enough of what IASME have achieved, but I totally agree with your views around inclusion being an ongoing journey. You can't, there's no tick in the box. We're inclusive. It doesn't stop. And I think around the journey that companies have to go on, there is a misconception that by saying that you want to hire neurodiverse individuals or any individual from a protected characteristic or background to increase diversity, which is a good thing. That's one very small part of a much larger puzzle around both the recruitment and the retention of talent, of diverse talent, having a diverse team, and retaining a diverse team is about creating an inclusive space within an organization, creating an inclusive culture. And a lot of that comes down to education, understanding, vulnerability, and this starting at the leadership level. For us, there are some fantastic companies out there. Rob Domain owns a company called 22 that supported IASME for many years, and they've got it right because it starts with Rob. It starts with the person at the top driving the behaviors below. So for companies that want to retain and recruit neurodiverse talent, which is what we're talking about at this moment in time, it's about a wider piece and committing long term to building an inclusive workforce, which, as Emma has pointed out, will create a business that is more profitable, able to solve more complex problems in a more dynamic way, has all the benefits of doing that. And again, we think about it. My experience from a recruitment point of view, very briefly, is that this is done incredibly poorly when it comes to neurodiversity in particular. there are a lot of things that we should be doing that are not happening in when companies are hiring for talent. Especially, we'll talk about cybersecurity. We've all seen them, the job adverts out there that will specify specific certifications, education levels. You've got to be communicative, innovative, dynamic, wonderful. You're all things to all people. And it's a very cookie cutter kind of, even the writing of the job descriptions, we can start to change that using clear, concise language based on the essential skills rather than all of the likes and things that we'd prefer to have. Looking at do they need excellent verbal communication skills if somebody's working in cybersecurity where they're spending hours reverse engineering malware or working in a SOC? Probably not. So take it out, doesn't it? You know, so again, looking at the core of what each job actually requires, the core capabilities that we require in those roles, and not necessarily the experience that somebody has, but the capabilities that they can bring to the business around those. I think that's key. And then when we go through the recruitment process, again, adapting that recruitment process, we know that people who are neurodiverse might prefer not to meet in person. So are we allowing the platform? We have all the capabilities these days to do Teams interviews. Do we do it? No, because we feel we have to meet that person. Why? Do we have remote working offered? We're seeing more and more that companies are preferring to bring people back into the workplace. I find that very strange. You know, we've proven we can do it, but the preference seems that we're drifting back into going into the office, and that's fine for some people, but as Emma says, for other people it's not okay. So is the option still there? You know, when we build an office space, are we back to the old school ways of having an open plan office with lots of noise and talking and lights, or are we having areas that are quieter, that have softer furnishings, that are thoughtful about the people that might be using this? And like I said, this might not be just for people who are neurodiverse, but people who are neurotypical. Some people really do prefer working in quieter areas or having headphones on, and is that okay? So my experience from a recruitment point of view is there are a few outliers, but in terms of companies that are trying, there are a few that are getting it right on a long-term basis and committing to creating truly inclusive workspaces, yet we can. So I'm excited about what we can do moving forward. I'd love to see what this new pseudo-government initiative is going to achieve from that, or how they're going to support businesses. Time will tell.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. So over to you, Mike. I mean, you have quite a unique perspective on this. You've got your daughters. School was just mentioned by Chris, and I realise this is quite a large can of worms, and there's been a lot of discussions around schools' ability to deal with neurodiversity. But what do you think, from your sort of professional and your business perspective, think that can be done to support people going into work, but also the businesses that are looking to, use neurodivergent people within their workforce?
Right. Well, I think the first thing is, and you've alluded to it there, my friend, is that it's much wider than just employment. We've got to look at the whole societal structure. It struck me that if you think about evidence from the National Autistic Society, for example, they reckon that 1% of the population is diagnosed as neurodiverse, or well, as autistic. And yet I'm beginning to find more and more that I suspect is a lot higher percentage than that. It's just that many of us have not been diagnosed. So we're not doing something weird. I mean that in an advised manner. We're not trying to cater for minority. As Chris pointed out, what we're doing is actually catering for the majority, including people who think of themselves as neurotypical. And if you go back through the process of this idea, I think what Emma's done with her organisation is fantastic. It really is outstanding. But you remind me of an old Chinese proverb, which is that a journey of 1,000 miles begins with the first step. So we have to start making steps somewhere, no matter how small they might feel. The other thing that you mentioned, which I think is spot on as well, is that everybody is an individual, and I don't care. I really dislike labels in some ways. In other ways, they're empowering because if it enables you to understand why your brain functions a certain way, that's good. But ultimately, we are all individuals, and I think the importance is trying to identify exactly what that job is, what the job spec is, and then consequently what the person spec is. So as Chris so elegantly put it, do you need to have brilliant verbal communication skills if that's not the majority of your job? You know, we can look elsewhere and find a way of recompensing for that. But to go on to this idea about employment, and this is what concerns me about that press statement, is it talks about people who are neurodiverse will benefit from better employment prospects. Well, that sort of hints at the fact you need to be in a salaried position. An awful lot of entrepreneurs, if you look at it very carefully, are probably neurodiverse. And as an event hosted a couple of years ago, Disability Expo, there's a very interesting panel I was involved with looking at education, and another one looking at employment. And an awful lot of people there was saying, actually, it's the neurodiverse population, the people who think outside the box, that are creating the new companies. The ones that get obsessed, I'm using that word advisedly, with a topic and want to continue to develop it. The ones who don't work your regular 9 to 5 because they function better in the evenings and can see something else going on. So I think in essence, what it begins with is a better awareness of what neurodiversity is. But as part of that understanding, as my daughter will put it, if you met one autistic person, you've only met one autistic person. And then that's the same for the rest of us, isn't it? So it's being able to take that and take it forward and then start to change culture from there. One more thing I want to add, Simon, before we look at other issues. It's not just about the person in employment or doing the work. Have we thought about the customers, the people receiving our services? Because if we increase our understanding of neurodiversity in the workplace, that has got to enhance our relationship with the people we're serving, ultimately the ones that are, as you said, Emma, paying up the money, making the company make a profit, which is what we're here to do. So it's a lot wider than just employment. And I think the basis of it is starting with the training, the awareness, and then taking it on from there.
Brilliant. Thank you, Mike, which is an amazing segue actually onto the next discussion point, which is, okay, so I'm a new business. You know, we've got lots of different connections, and I don't mean Adapt IT. This is a sort of, what are the kind of things that I need to consider? And the fact that I need to consider it kind of suggests that there isn't enough education out there. We understand that. In order to make my business ready to support new people, to coin Chris's view, you know, to add to my culture so that we become that diverse business, but also so that we can support the people within the business that may or may not know, or I don't know, that they're neurodiverse. Mike, can I come back to you on that from an OT perspective on what I could potentially do?
Okay, so OT, let's just explore what that is first of all. People think about it as being occupational health. It's not. Occupation in this sense refers to all the things that are purposeful occupation, the things that make us us. And part of that, a subsection, is vocation, employment, and so on. So I think one of the basic things to do is just take a step back a little way and think about why you're doing what you're doing. Why have you set up your business? And I'm guessing if you tease that back a little bit, Simon, it's because it's something that interests you. It's something that gets you fired up. It's something that ticks the boxes and makes you feel good and satisfied at the end of the day. Now, it's the same for the rest of us, including our so-called neurodiverse population. And I'm using that advice. I know some people get really irritated at me. I'm probably throwing things at the screen by now and cursing me. But As I said a few minutes ago, I'm really concerned that people get labelled, and when you label people, you make assumptions, and assumptions aren't always helpful. So what is it that gets people up and going? And that's, if you think about it, goes back to school. And at school, a lot of us would have found, I don't know about other people on this panel, but a lot of people I talked to, school was not the happiest days of our life. We're being made to fit in and do things that we didn't feel comfortable doing, either because of the sensory overload, as Chris mentioned earlier, or maybe it's because when you're asked to do a French lesson and the first job is to draw a picture on the front of your book to make it look nice, and you think, well, drawing the picture is art, why am I wasting my time in this lesson now? And you start to get disengaged. So once we understand that, then we can start to think about, in our application process, trying to understand the individual more. Yes, we need to understand the role that we do, because at the end of the day, as Emma's pointed out, we have got goals to meet. It is a contract of employment. There are things that we need to do to meet that. But often there's more than one way of doing that particular thing. Not always, I accept that. And part of our job at the interview stage is actually highlighting, are we the right fit for that individual? People forget that interviewing is a two-way process. And we should be making a process where it is comfortable for people to interview us as well and find out more about us. Now that's difficult because you're in a stressful situation. And the whole thing with interviews and stress is that we all have stress buckets. And for those of us that are neurodiverse, our stress bucket's already at least half full just with the journey coming in. Wearing clothing that we don't normally wear that feels uncomfortable. Am I going to say the right things? Will I misinterpret the non-verbals? If I'm coming via public transport, will it turn up on time? If I turn up at the building, is it the right building? I turned up at a building just this morning for an appointment. There was no one on reception and there were no signs telling me that I was at the right place. That was extremely anxiety provoking for me. And it wasn't anything major, but it was still anxiety provoking. So the preparation before the interview, sending an email that might have a link and photos of the building, of knowing where to go, the pictures of people you're going to meet on that day, at least that will help. Do we need to have the formal uniform context of an interview of in my case, it'd be a suit and tie? Because maybe there's other ways of gauging people and whether they look presentable. And actually, what is presentable? How important is it? If someone is looking like they take care of themselves, good. But I'm very pleased to say that a lot of places are getting more relaxed about hair, tattoos, and things like that, particularly if it's not customer facing. And here's something which might throw some people listening to this. Why not give the interviewee the questions in advance so they've got a chance to think about it? It's a stressful situation as it is, and when you're being asked questions that you don't know and you're struggling with your communication skills at that point, it's already setting you up to fail. Whereas surely what we want when we're interviewing is to understand that that person is going to be the right fit for our business. And let's throw this one out. Not everybody will be aware they're neurodiverse, but let's ask the question anyway in such a way that says, so what works best for you? What works well for you when you work? Do you like crowds? Do you like being on your own? Does music help? Does quietness help? At least if it's prepared and you ask it in the interview, there's a chance of understanding that. Now, again, I will come back to this point. I'm not naive. There are certain things in certain businesses that have to be done a certain way. I'm not stupid. I'm not trying to say we should get away from that. But it's about helping that individual find the right fit as well. And if we are not the right fit for them, then giving the feedback afterwards in a way that is positive, that allows the individual to learn about themselves, has got to be a plus from my point of view.
Thanks, Mike. And that kind of takes me back to one of the comments that you made when we were discussing this previously with regards to, you know, just because somebody has struggled at school doesn't actually mean they're going to struggle in the workplace. If I take my own example as a sort of discussion piece, if I may, when I was at school, I genuinely didn't see the point. I was being asked to do stuff that, it just didn't seem to have any application, whether that was down to me not understanding or down to the way that it was taught. And yet, as soon as I left school and went into the workplace, everything I was doing had a point. And I had a mentor when I was working with Kinetic, another large organization. It was DERA at the time. I had a gentleman called Dr. Rob Rideout, who was a scientist and did a lot with space-based application systems. And he worked on the basis of he could get people to do an awful lot more if they just understood the reason why they were doing it. And for me, that was really important. Of course, there was always times when you were firefighting, and I'm sure Emma, Chris, Mike, yourself, you've seen it where, at times you've just got to do it. And obviously there's a lot of colourful acronyms that go with that. But that was always not the norm. The norm was always, right, I want you to do this. This is what you need to do. And then I could apply my skills and my ability in order to be able to deliver that. And that was one of the core things that I think a lot of businesses miss. There's an awful lot of micromanagement or, just get on and do it. You're not being paid to think, which I've been accused of in the past, which is quite amusing in order to do that. Right, well, thanks very much for those insights. I'm just wary of the time, and we're sort of moving into our final section. We've talked about neurodivergency within school and within the workplace, and we know that we are in a better place than we ever were. I mean, in the 70s and 80s, when I grew up, neurodivergency, I don't think was even a term. I was disruptive, I was rude, I couldn't keep focus, and what was I doing? Get out of the class, go and speak to the headmistress, or stand outside facing the wall kind of thing. But the government have kind of drawn a line in the sand and said that they need to do a lot more in order to support neurodiverse people and businesses. So I'm going to put it out to the panel, and if I can start with yourself, Emma. As a business, what help and support could be given by government, and we've got to realise there's only a certain level of support they can give, in order to help businesses such as yourself to be able to achieve what it is you're trying to achieve within your goals to make a better business?
So I think the main area that we could use more help in is the sort of workplace assessments. So the government does have access to work, but we find that the access to work service varies very, very much in different areas of the country. And there's a massive waiting list, and it tends to, give you a new chair or a piece of software that often we can't use with our systems anyway. And so we're now training up our own staff to do workplace assessments. And it's not just, here's a new piece of software. It's much more nuanced. Often it's free. It's just helping the manager and helping the individual understand how they can work better. I think if the government could offer things like that, it's all very well for us. We're a growing company, and we really, really believe in it, and we're happy to train people up to do it. But if only the government could offer things like that, I think it would be really impactful for all organisations. So that's what I would like them to do.
Cool. Chris?
Ooh, it's tricky, isn't it? So I completely agree with that, with what both panelists have said thus far, and I also, the government is focusing on what businesses can do, but to Mike's point, we're talking about something that shouldn't necessarily be changed in a business. This is societal. And I reflect on schools in particular. Are we really celebrating consistently, beyond one day a year, differences, diversity across a variety of different, the wonderful fabric of different elements that people in all shapes and guises bring? And my experience with my kids is probably, to a degree, maybe but not necessarily as much as we should be, to a place where kids are blank slates, right? They do not have prejudices once born. These are learned behaviors. So if we're saying that a lot of this is about education and awareness, and I think most of what we've talked about here is around education and awareness. It's a two-way stream. Those people who are neurodiverse and those people neurotypical, everybody needs to be aware of the differences, the nuances, and to be okay with that. It's okay to be different. It's good to be different. It's good to be different because we get different outcomes. There are a few different white papers that have come out recently, actually, about the evolutionary elements of neurodiversity, how it's good that we have different ways of thinking from an evolutionary point of view, so that we do get those leaps in innovation because people think differently. And as Mike pointed out, a lot of an abnormally high number of entrepreneurs, business leaders, people who own businesses are now either later on thinking, I think differently. And why is that? Well, they're probably the people who've gone, I think I can do it better this way. I'm going to give it a go. And everybody else is going, no, don't do that. It's really difficult and really dangerous. And they've gone, I love it. Love difficult and dangerous. I'm going for it. Right. So these are the innovators. They think differently. If we didn't think differently, we wouldn't get those leaps in innovation. So going back to what government can do, it's around celebrating and developing an understanding within the wider community. You're starting right at the bottom with kids, and that means teachers as well, being able to understand that a kid with ADHD, with autism, with Asperger's, that's great, that's good. This should be celebrated as much as it is explored, so that then when people are going into the workplace, it's no longer a manager going, hi, I'd really like to support my colleague and person in my team that has disclosed that they have autism. I don't even know how to start that conversation. I'm not comfortable doing it. And I think that for a lot of people I speak to, it's that comfort element. They don't feel comfortable in even talking about, I want to support somebody with autism. Can I talk to you about that? No, I'm not going to talk about it. So I'm just going to sit. And so I think there's a huge amount of untapped potential. So if the government can, in some way, shape or form, create more awareness within businesses and the wider community on diversity of thought and how that's a really good thing and how we can support each other through that, I think that would be excellent. A playbook for companies, front to back, of, okay, so you want to get serious about inclusion, and in this element we're going to talk about neurodiversity. These are the things that we can do. These are the things that we will physically support you as a government, as in mostly give you either cash or people to help a company doing that. And I think about the small businesses that I know. Emma, you've gone through this. You're committed to the walls to this, right? But it hasn't been easy, and it's probably taken time out of all the other things that you want to do, developing your product, developing your clients, developing awareness, marketing, finance, all these other things. Oh yes, and we've got to be inclusive. It's an extra element for any small business. So anything that can take, I'm not saying that the business doesn't have to be responsible for it does, but the government actually physically giving resources in some way, shape or form, as well as a playbook, that can only help, in my humble opinion.
Thank you, Chris. Mike?
I think I'm going to be a bit more contentious. I want the government to stay out of it. I think government completely cocks things up. And the idea is that all they're looking at is the increased taxation and how they can get the money. Now, this is my view. This isn't a necessarily view anywhere else, but let me explain my reasoning. You look at the government-run organisations as it is, the Department of Health, the NHS trusts, the social care services. In my experience and experience of my colleagues who use them, they're rubbish at meeting the needs of the neurodiverse community in general. I'm reminded of someone I went in to advise. I've been asked by a trust to give specific advice because his one patient was not compliant with treatment. Within 5 minutes of being in there, all my little radar cues are being picked up on. This person's neurodiverse. We continued the conversation. Transpired she hadn't been diagnosed, but she'd been identifying as autistic for the last 5 or 6 years. I raised that with the staff, and suddenly, instead of having awkward patient, challenging patient, uncooperative patient, they've got a psychologist involved. She was assessed being autistic, and from being given weeks to live, she was actually transferred home within 2 months and continued to make a good recovery, all because staff values changed. So I'm very cynical about governments claiming they know what they're doing. I really am. That said, we do need a national change, and I believe it starts not with employment, but as Chris said, with education. Currently, as we speak, the government of the day is reviewing its whole provision of education and SEND, that's special educational needs and disability provision. It has to be shook up, in my opinion. It is too exam-led, it's not person-led, and in my opinion, that's where we start, and it needs to be focused on individuals and individuals' needs development. Yes, I appreciate we have to think about how do we see if someone is able to do certain roles in the workforce, but I think it's going to start at educational level, which now completely contradicts what I said, because it's got to be a government initiative. So I'm probably not the most helpful person on the panel at this stage, folks, but I think it has to start with education more so than employment. On the other hand, one last plug, because I've got to say something about arms rehab. We have worked with some fantastic people who are very keen to widen their awareness of neurodiversity. And as long as there's a role for me to come, then perhaps government could give some grants to businesses to actually pay for us to come out and do the work.
Sorry, just jumping in there. So I think that's really interesting, just reflecting on that, Mike. I mean, does the government have a mandate to fix its own situation first? Would actually a better thing be for government to focus on government being more inclusive and hiring people themselves in a more inclusive manner and being the champions for it internally before they start telling businesses how they should be doing it? Do you know what I mean? So you think about how many government employees there are, and it's a big round building in Cheltenham, which is an outlier in terms of hiring neurodiverse individuals, because they're incredibly technical and great at solving problems that other people just can't do. They don't really talk about it very much because, the nature of what they do, GCHQ, but they are an outlier, which is a good thing. But actually, like you said, could the, rather than setting up it's hard to say, look, you should be doing like this, and everybody going, but you're not. So maybe there's an opportunity there for government to focus on fixing its own internal workings and being a truly inclusive hirer for talent and neurodiverse talent within that, as one thing. The other point I was looking at is right now, we've got a Labour government, regardless of whether you vote left or right or whatever, however that looks, that's just raised taxes for businesses. They're not affecting the average person. They are by the nature of how they flow down. But could the government be putting in place financial incentives around either tax breaks for inclusive hiring or subsidised workplace adjustments, or making it monetarily beneficial for companies to be doing this? It doesn't solve the cultural piece, but it actually might be does it help? Emma, sorry, I can see you definitely jump in.
So I don't think that we need incentives from the government. I think companies just need to believe us when we say we make more money with a diverse workforce. And I don't know why people don't believe it, but we do. We make more money. There's no need for incentives or anything else. We spend a lot of money on trying to bring in more diverse people and trying to help them to fit into the workplace. Not because we're nice, but because it means that we make more money. And there's no other reason that we need to do it. I was just going to say another thing is that absolutely essential we find is that senior managers talk about the things that they find difficult. Because if the senior managers are all perfect and can do everything, then why would anyone say that they can't in the company? Whereas as long as senior managers say, you know, I find this really difficult and I struggle with this, it gives everyone in the company permission to say, I'm finding this aspect difficult. And it takes away the shame. You know, if the CEO is absolutely rubbish at things and doesn't feel shame, then other people can be rubbish at things and there is no shame. Everyone finds some things difficult. So yeah, we found that really difficult. We found that really important to have an inclusive organisation. But the reason we do it is we make money and we don't need grants.
I tell you what, it's amazing hearing the chorus that the three of you have just made there, because you've kind of summed up everything that I was going to say. I would prefer that government were the champions of it, to say, look, this is what we can achieve as a country by being inclusive. This is the benefits to business. And the one thing I'd really like government to do is step back a little bit and let the people that understand this do the work and help drive this forward and help drive the community that is made up of a lot of small businesses, charities and specialists that understand this area to actually help businesses that want to achieve this as well. And, you know, even God forbid, actually ask those people to come in and support government to achieve their agendas of inclusivity. Now, I'm not saying that all government bodies are bad, but what I'm saying is we could all do with help. And I think there's plenty of expertise in small businesses and charities out there that have the expertise to do this. Government don't need to create their own expert panel to say what works and what doesn't work. They need to embrace what's already out there. Anyway, that's Simon on his soapbox. Wow. Thank you so much, all three of you. It's been an amazing discussion today. I just want to thank yourself, Emma, Mike, and Chris for joining us and bringing your expert opinions and thoughts to this discussion and this debate. I want to remind everybody that there will be a part 2 of this video. Obviously today is Tuesday. The next video will be released at 9 AM on Thursday. So watch out for that. That'll be a very different perspective on neurodiversity in the workplace, focusing very much on the individuals and people that are actually going through that at the moment. If you have any questions for our panel, we're actually online at the moment if you're watching the premiere of this. If not, please place all your questions and comments below the video link and we will try and get back to you when possible or if possible. Please subscribe to our channel, give video thumbs up. At the end of this video, we'll have the relevant contact details for the people that are on this. So if you've got any questions for them directly, I'm sure they will be happy to help. So thanks very much. We look forward to seeing you on the next one and enjoy the rest of your week.